Hello! A few things before we get started. Number one, this top looks a lot more pink in this lighting than anticipated, so we're going to roll with that. Second thing is the kittens are actually in here with me today, so if you hear any weird stuff going on, it's just them. They're being a bit crazy. I apologise. And thirdly, this whole lockdown thing is completely throwing my conception of time out the window, especially because we just had a long bank holiday weekend and I was on leave from work the week before, so I honestly have no idea what day of the week it is at the moment. Hence why this video is late, because it wasn't until I went to bed last night that I realised, oh, it's Wednesday. I should be posting a video tomorrow morning, but I haven't filmed one yet and I've got work all day. So guess that's not happening. So it's an evening post rather than a morning post. I apologise, you probably didn't even notice, but I thought I would address it. I am here to talk about the next 7 books that I read in the month of April. Now, I realise I usually wrap up 5 at a time, but it didn't make sense to wrap up 5 and then wrap up the last 2 of my Owls reads in a different video, so I'm just going to wrap up the last of my Owls reads here. The first one I'm going to talk about is Morte by Terry Pratchett, which is a Discworld novel. It's the 4th book in the Discworld, but the 1st book in the Death trilogy, and I've been looking forward to picking this up for so long, so I'm absolutely gutted that I didn't love this. I didn't hate it either, but it just didn't do everything I wanted it to do. It felt just a little bit too bizarre for me, and that really worries me because it makes me think that actually maybe it's just that Terry Pratchett's writing style really doesn't work for me. This story follows Morte, who becomes the apprentice to Death, and Morte is the kind of character who is overlooked and he's bad at stuff, and so him becoming Death's apprentice is pretty much a recipe for disaster, and disaster kind of follows in this book, and it is just a little bit weird and wacky, and of course the Discworld is a little bit weird and wacky as well, so we knew that going in, but I don't know, I really struggle to put my finger on exactly what it was about this book that didn't precisely work for me. I suppose it didn't necessarily help that I went into this story wanting to read about Death personified, and what I got was Death's apprentice Morte, and that just wasn't what I wanted. Even though I knew that that was what was going to happen, I was wanting more time with Death as a character, and he's not in it very much, which is a shame because as a character I find him very interesting, so that kind of sucks. Didn't love it as much as I wanted to, and I'm really, really sad. If I have anybody watching who is familiar with the Discworld and wants to make a recommendation for me, I'm not going to necessarily give up, but a little bit of guidance would be greatly appreciated if anybody is able to offer any. Next, I'm going to talk about An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Also, I should probably say, Morte was for herbology, the prompt for which was to read a book that starts with the letter M, which this indeed does. An Enchantment of Ravens was for care of magical creatures, which was to read a book with a beak on the cover, and there is indeed a raven on the cover which does in fact have a beak. This is a fae story. We follow a mortal, a human person living in the fae world. Her name is Isabel, and she is an artist. She is a painter, and she paints portraits mainly for the people of the fae world, fairies, because they can't do any kind of craft, whether it be painting or cooking. They can't do it. If it involves creation, it's not something that they can do, and so she is commissioned by many a fae to paint portraits of them, and she's very, very popular. But one day she makes a mistake and paints human sorrow into the eyes of a prince, and that doesn't go down particularly well, but essentially the main crux of this story is a love story and a travelling story. Now, that comes in two parts. First part, travelling stories. I'm not keen on them. If I had known that this was a travelling story going into it, I would have still read it, but I would have gone into it expecting a travelling story and being prepared for that. It's not something that I tend to enjoy in books. It's a trope that just doesn't really work for me. So that didn't help this one. I did like the characters though, and I did like the relationship between them. The pacing of this one is very, very strange. It's a fairly short book, as you can tell. It has only 297 pages, and it is a standalone. That's what Margaret Rogerson does. She writes standalone fantasy stories, which is great because we don't get a lot of those. But I'm beginning to wonder if either standalone fantasy doesn't work for me, or Margaret Rogerson doesn't work for me. I'm not liking this camera angle. I'm going to change it. That's better, I think. So as I was saying, I don't know if it's just Margaret Rogerson's writing that I don't get on with, or if it's standalone fantasy that I don't get on with. I don't read a lot of standalone fantasy because there isn't a lot of standalone fantasy. But I found the opening to this really interesting and really well paced. And then the middle section I wasn't too fond of because it was the travelling story section of the story, which, as I've already said, is not really my thing, and I could have done with that having gone a bit quicker. That's more me than about the story itself. The ending, though, was one of those where we sort of, this is the ending. No, it's not. This is the ending now. No, it's not. This is the big final scene. No, it's not. No, this one is. No, it's not. And I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. I don't really know what else to say. I find that if you have too many climax scenes near the end of the book, then none of them feel climactic anymore and they completely lose their effect. So the end felt a little bit dragged out and I didn't like that. So I did enjoy this book, but I didn't love it as much as I hoped I would, and that's sad. So we're not doing so well so far, are we? But things are on the up. Next up, I picked up Sea Witch by Sarah Henning, which was for Defence Against the Dark Arts. Read a book that is set at sea or at the coast. And this one's kind of a bit of both, but it is all set either at sea or at the coast, so very firmly fit within that prompt. This is essentially an Ursula origin story, and it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I do tend to quite like origin stories. I haven't read or consumed a lot of them. I think my favourite is the West End musical Wicked. I don't know if it started in the West End or if it started on Broadway. Either way, it's a musical. It's called Wicked. It is the origin story of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and it is fabulous, and it began my love of origin stories, and this is a really good one. I really liked it. Our character is Evie, and Evie has a best friend, and she has somebody that she has a crush on, and she has somebody that she is trying to help. And it's a really great story of growth and friendship and all different kinds of love and struggles, and there's magic in here and mermaids, perhaps unsurprisingly, And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everyone. First off, if you don't like origin stories, definitely not for you. And I suspect that it's actually a little bit predictable, but because I don't read too much into what I'm reading, I tend not to try to guess what is going to happen. And I also read this very quickly. I read it in one day, so I didn't really have time to spend too long wondering about what was going to happen, because I wanted to just read and find out what was going to happen. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, there is book 2, which I don't understand, and I don't think I'll be picking that up. This story finishes off pretty nicely, in my opinion. I enjoyed how and where it ended, and I don't necessarily have any desire to go beyond that, and I feel like book 2 could potentially spoil book 1, so I'm probably not going to pick that up, but this one I thoroughly enjoyed. The next 3 I'm actually going to talk about only very, very quickly, because I actually did a weekend reading vlog where I read all 3 of these books, and I talk about them in much more detail in that vlog. So rather than repeat myself, I'm just going to go ahead and link the vlog up there, and if you want my more detailed thoughts about these 3, that's where you can find them. The first one was Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Reese. This is a book under 150 pages and therefore satisfied the shrinking potion prompt for potions class. And this is a prequel to Jane Eyre. So mild spoilers for Jane Eyre in terms of the rest of the summary of the plot of this, but I will keep it brief because it's only a short book anyway. So this story follows the life of Antoinette. Antoinette is otherwise known as Bertha in Jane Eyre, and is the first wife of Mr. Rochester, who is described as insane and living in the attic, and eventually she, well, I won't totally spoil Jane Eyre, but this follows her life and the beginning of her relationship with Mr. Rochester, and it's pretty bleak. It's a very hard read, and I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it. Next up, I read Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas for Charms class, which was to read a book with a white cover, which this predominantly has. This is book 2 in the Throne of Glass series that follows Selena Sardothian, who is an assassin. And at the open of Throne of Glass, she is in prison. She's in a sort of prison labour camp, and she's offered an opportunity to be freed from this camp in exchange for competing in a competition to become the king's champion, i.e. his personal assassin. This is the continuation of that story, and I really enjoyed it. I hear a lot of mixed stuff about the Throne of Glass series. It seems to be fairly polarising. A lot of people really love it and a lot of people really, really don't. And whilst I wouldn't say it's the best series I've ever read, I'm still enjoying myself. This book was a little bit strange in terms of pacing as well. The first half, it wasn't that it was badly paced, it's just that the first half I was sat there thinking to myself, how is this a 7-book series? There isn't enough material here for 7 books. 3, yes. 7? Definitely not. And then the second half of the book, there's a whole load of stuff that just gets thrown at you, one thing after another, and suddenly 7 books makes perfect sense. So, really enjoyed it. If you want more thoughts, again, vlog linked in the corner. And then also The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, which also was somewhat unexpected. Now, this book I read for History of Magic, which we were required to read a book featuring a witch or wizard. Including this one is potentially a little bit of a stretch. I picked this book on the basis that it was on the spreadsheet as having witches or wizards in it. And strictly speaking, the word witch or wizard is not used ever in this book. However, what is a witch? What is a wizard? Are they just magic wielders? Because if they are, this book has them. So, yes, it's a stretch, but we're going to go with it. Give me a break. I read 12 books for the owls. I haven't done the Dragon Tamer training yet. I do want to do that still, but I've got half a month yet, so we're all good. This book is much more mysterious than I was expecting it to be, and the mystery elements are kind of the main plot, so I don't want to tell you too much about the plot because I don't want to spoil it for you. I think that mystery is really what drives the story forward and made it so entertaining, at least for me. And I don't usually like mystery in my fantasy, but this one worked. We follow Alice, who lives with her mum, and they travel around a lot because bad luck follows them and makes every living arrangement that they've ever had go bad and mean that they have to leave. Alice's grandmother is the somewhat famous author of a book of fairy tales, Tales of the Hinterland, and Alice doesn't really know her. They have never met, she doesn't go to visit her, her mother doesn't want her to know her grandmother, so she doesn't, and she's never even read this book. And then when her grandmother passes away, she is determined to find out more. And I think I'll leave it there. Just know that the main plot of the story is a mystery. She does go into a fantastical world and deals with many trials along the way. She makes some friends. She discovers herself. This is another one that has a sequel that I'm not sure I want to read because I am happy with how this story wrapped up. But unlike with Sea Witch, which is a continuation, the sequel to the Hazelwood is meant to be, I mean, the same characters, the same urban fantasy world, but not necessarily a continuation. It's just sort of a new story. I don't really know because I haven't read either of them, and I'm not sure I will, is my point. So if any of you have read either of those sequels, let me know what you thought of them. And then the final book that I'm going to talk about is Tales of Beedle the Bard by J.K. Rowling. And I loved this. This was so good. As you can see, I have the beautiful illustrated edition, illustrated by Chris Riddle, and if you are an Audible member, or if you're not, you can get Audible for free for 30 days with a free audiobook, and you can get the Tales of Beedle the Bard, the audiobook, for free as an Audible member, and I highly recommend, if you are able to get your hands on it, do it. Whether you have a physical copy of the book or not, the audiobook is incredible. It is narrated by various members of the cast from the films. So we have young Albus Dumbledore, Jude Law, we have Phileas Flitwick, we have Ginny Weasley, we have Luna Lovegood, we have Lucius Malfoy. It's fantastic. It's so well put together and great, and there are sound effects, and I read this for astronomy, and that required you to read a book completely at night, so I read this in one evening. The audiobook is like an hour, so really not difficult to read in one evening. And I sat down on my little chair over there, I lit a candle, got a nice drink, got my blankets, I put on the audiobook and I followed along in this beautiful illustrated edition, and it was just the most wonderful evening. It was absolutely beautiful. I was fully transported away. I was completely absorbed in this story. I don't think I need to tell you what this is about. Very briefly, it is a set of children's stories from the magical world of Harry Potter. There are also Albus Dumbledore's musings and thoughts about the stories that are in the Tales of Beedle the Bard, and it was just so wonderful to read this in the way that I read it, and I highly recommend this one. It is stunning. This edition is stunning, the audiobook is stunning, the stories are beautiful, just everything about that reading experience was just perfection. So that's why I dealt with that one last, because honestly it was just such a wonderful part of my Owls TBR. And that's it. Those are the most recent 7 books that I read, but I have now wrapped up all 12 of my OWLs. I am, like I said before, going to do the Dragon Tamer training at some point throughout the month, and I will wrap up that book when I get to it. But that is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks! Bye!